I'm going to say good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Suberg, and I'm the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. This is a meeting of the Commission to investigate glyphosate established by Chapter 24 of the Acts of 2021. Under emergency measures adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor in June, specifically Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, public bodies such as this commission may hold virtual meetings in lieu of meeting in public spaces that are open to and physically accessible to the public. In addition, under this authority, all members of a public body may participate remotely, suspending the typical requirement that both the chair and a quorum of the public body be physically present. These provisions are in place until April 2022. And I will discuss more about the direction and the requirements of Chapter 24 in a moment. But first, I'll start with the people that constitute the commission. Per the statute, I have been designated as chair of the commission, and we have additional members who I will call now and ask the commission members to identify themselves. And so I'll start first with the Commissioner of Agriculture.
Thank you, Commissioner Suberg. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John LeBeau. I'm the Commissioner of the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. And within our department, our pesticide program regulates use of pesticides in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next commission member is the Commissioner of Public Health or designee. Would you please identify yourself?
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Mark Nascarella. I'm the Chief Toxicologist at the Department of Public Health, and I'm representing Acting Commissioner Margaret Cook, DPH.
Thank you. The Director of Division of Fisheries and Wildlife or designee.
Good afternoon, Eve Schluter. I'm an assistant director at Mass Wildlife, and I oversee the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. I'm representing our director, Mark Tiza.
Thank you and welcome. And then the member who is a representative of a land trust or other organization with expertise in invasive plant management as designated by the Joint Committee on Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Richberg. I'm the lead ecologist for Inland Natural Resources with the Trustees of Reservations in Massachusetts.
Terrific. Thank you very much for serving on this commission and welcome. So thank you all. All commission members are present and we have a quorum. I would like to also note that we have staff from agencies here that will be calling on in this meeting to provide information related to the charge of this group. Later in the agenda, you'll be hearing from Taryn Lascola of the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, Benjamin Mishalom, and Mark Smith from MassDEP. I will also be providing an opportunity for public comment at the end of this meeting. If you are, later in the meeting, we will be asking you, if you are a member of the public that would like to make a comment, to virtually raise your hand. Paul Locke, who is helping us coordinate this meeting, will note that and make sure that we're allowing opportunity for you to speak. With respect to the legislative charge, Chapter 24 states, and I'm going to take a moment to read it just to make sure that we're all reminded of the charge. I know we've all been looking at this, but just for the public's benefit as well. This commission shall conduct a scientific review of the potential impacts of glyphosate and its most common alternative herbicides on the environment and public health, including a review undertaken in collaboration with the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program of the potential impacts of glyphosate and most common alternative herbicides on Roman numeral 1, all species of plants and animals that have been determined to be endangered, threatened, or of special concern pursuant to Chapter 131A of the general laws. And 2, all significant habitats designated pursuant to said Chapter 131A, provided further that the commission may expend any portion of its funds it deems necessary to enable the collaboration of the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, provided further that the pesticide subcommittee established under Section 3A of Chapter 132B of the general laws shall use said scientific review as part of an individual review conducted under 333 Code of Massachusetts Regulations 8.03 to determine whether current uses of glyphosate pose unreasonable adverse impacts or effects to the environment, and whether current registered uses of glyphosate should be altered or suspended. Provided further that the department shall submit the results of both the scientific review and individual review to the Joint Committee on Environment, Natural Resources and Agriculture no later than December 31st, 2021. And that is the charge of the statute. Now, as we've noticed, and it was certainly evident again in the reading of it, the deadline currently called for in the statute is December 31st. It is a very aggressive timeline, and I know we all share the commitment to be working to make progress as quickly as we can. But I have approached the bill sponsor and the Joint Committee to ask if we could have a short extension to make sure that we can do a thorough job on this important topic. I have suggested a March 30th, 2022 deadline. There is language pending in the legislature, thanks to an amendment filed by Chair Roush, that would provide that extension to March 30th, as well as additional funding for the work to be done. We are looking forward to getting that additional time and financial support, and we will certainly be keeping the commission and the public posted. In the meantime, and as you will shortly hear, our staff and MDAR staff have given some thought and to developing an approach for how to conduct this review and help inform the work of the commission. Given the directive to share this information with the Pesticide Committee, we will also be spending a little bit of time reviewing with Taryn Lascola how the Pesticide Subcommittee regulates pesticides. Before we begin, though, we'll start with a little bit of procedure. Our Office of General Counsel has informed me that this commission and its work is governed by the rules of the Commonwealth's open meeting laws. To ensure compliance with the transparency and procedural requirements of that statute, I'd like to ask Benjamin Misholam of DEP's Office of General Counsel to give us an overview of those requirements and see if the commission members have any questions. So Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm just going to take a few very brief minutes to provide an overview of the open meeting law. Presumably, some folks here are very familiar with it, having served on public bodies before. Others may not be. I know that Anne, in the initial email, sent some information around, but I thought I would highlight sort of two very kind of broad areas and then see if folks have any questions. So the open meeting law is governed by Chapter 30A, sections 18 through 25 of the Massachusetts general laws, and also some regulations and guidance that have been put out there by the Attorney General's office. And the Attorney General's office has, enforcement investigatory power with respect to open meeting law. The first sort of bucket of things I wanted to talk about are really things that I think we all thought the commission members should be aware of, but ultimately are going to be taken on and have been taken on by DEP staff as a matter of sort of administrative and logistical sort of responsibility. Again, just wanted to make folks aware of them, but there's, I would say, nothing for the commission members to necessarily do. So those areas are going to be managed by, the chair and the staff working under the chair are things like notice, making sure the notice is in proper form and put in the, posted in the right places within the right time frame. Maintaining the website with whatever materials, are decided that should be put on the website, except for the notice. There's really nothing that is obligated to be put on the website, but, that website has been and will be maintained. Keeping track of roll calls, because this is a virtual meeting. If there is a vote on anything in a typical sort of in-person meeting, roll calls were not necessarily required. In this instance, virtual meetings, roll calls are necessary for every vote. So we will help sort of track that. The staff will help track that. Executive session, there are, the open meeting law is obviously intended to ensure transparency. So everything, for the most part, happens in an open meeting like this one, a virtual open meeting. There are 10 sort of statutorily defined reasons that a commission can go, or a public body, in this instance, this commission, can go into executive session, many of them having to do with employment, with litigation, with negotiations with particular parties that need to be kept confidential for a period of time for a particular reason. If a committee or this commission does decide to go into executive session for whatever reason, there are some procedural predicates, and we will help manage that as staff to make sure that the proper steps are taken. And then executive session happens sort of, it's essentially a closed session to protect confidentiality. But again, there are 10 very specific reasons that you'll see in the guide, and I'm happy to answer any questions about those. And then the last sort of big bucket of things we're going to do is just maintain the minutes, the records, the documents that come through. The minutes do not need to be a transcript. They do need to be provided to the public. If members of the public request them within certain timeframes, they would need to be provided, and we will make sure to maintain those minutes in proper form, and pass along those minutes to whoever requests them. In terms of commission members, and this I think will probably be of the most interest to people, there are really sort of two main responsibilities. One of them is purely sort of ministerial, administrative, and that's just making sure that when you have a moment to take a look at the open meeting law guide that was sent to you in Ann's email before this meeting. And in the very last page of that guide, I believe there's a form. If you could sign that form, certifying that you have received and reviewed the guide and get that along to Ann, electronic signature is totally fine. We simply keep those on record. We'll just keep them on record. And then the most important obligation that folks presumably are aware of with respect to the open meeting law is with respect to deliberations. So the main sort of charge, the main responsibility is that all deliberations need to be in as long as they're not sort of exempt to be in executive session, need to be in a meeting that's duly noticed like this one and open to the public. So a deliberation is defined as a meetings, or excuse me, or a deliberation of a public body with respect to any matter within the body's jurisdiction. So in this instance, you heard the commissioner sort of go over the specific charge of this commission, the legislative charge. Any discussions need to happen between a quorum, need to happen in a public meeting. A deliberation, in turn, is defined as an oral or written communication through any medium, including electronic mail, between or among a quorum of a public body on any business within its jurisdiction. There are some very limited exceptions here. So if there are emails, for example, or communications via email relative to scheduling meetings, purely sort of administrative matters, that is appropriate and not a violation of open meeting law, to the extent that the conversation sort of veers to the actual subject matter that would need to happen in an open meeting. If documents are circulated and somebody responds to the whole group and proffers an opinion, that could potentially constitute a violation of the open meeting law as a deliberation that's happening outside of a duly noticed meeting. So if a document, a draft is sent around of something and somebody has comments, obviously, if you could just sort of take your notes, do whatever preparatory work you would need to do, but make sure to bring that back to the committee. The other thing that historically has tripped people up is this sort of intersection between what constitutes a quorum and what's called serial communications, right? So any conversation that is technically between less than a quorum does not constitute a violation of the open meeting law. So if two members of the commission happen to talk about something, whether they bump into each other somewhere or it's sort of more intentional or planned, may not technically be a violation of the open meeting law. But if one of those two people updates a third person, right, in this instance, there are 5 of you, on the conversation that you had, that could be construed as a serial communication that is in violation of the open meeting law, whether that's an email that's forwarded that sort of adds up to a quorum or just a series of sort of iterative conversations. So the Attorney General in various decisions has really, and in the guide as well, has really emphasized to members of public bodies to not engage in that kind of communication. That is pretty much it on the high level. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have about the open meeting law, but that is sort of the gist of it. There are some special procedures that allow us to do a virtual meeting today and through December and through March if necessary, if that extension happens. So all of this is sort of is kosher and appropriate from that perspective as well. Again, happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Okay, thank you very much, Benjamin, for that overview and the cautions that you've provided, and thank you for the reminder also for us to make sure that we're filling out the acknowledgements of receipt of the open meeting law guides.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll pause here. Are there any questions from the commission members that they'd like to pose about open meeting law issues? We'll obviously be talking about other things, but right here, let's see if there are any questions about the procedural elements we just went through. Okay, not hearing any. Benjamin, thank you very much. Appreciate the keeping us on the right side of the process here. I'm also going to pause here and see if there are any questions about, we reviewed right before we did the open meeting discussion, we reviewed the legislative charge. Anything anybody wants to ask about that as we start out and before we get too deep into the agenda? Okay, again, reading sort of virtual body language here. I don't see any questions right now. So we'll move on. And obviously, anytime, certainly anytime a commission member, wants to ask clarifying questions or anything, feel free to speak up. We thought it would make sense, again, given the charge of the group, to not only do the work of the scientific review, but also share the information with the pesticide subcommittee. I've invited Taryn Lascola of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources to give us a brief overview of the work of that committee, so we can be mindful of how this information could be used, and to the extent that information is helpful in the types of things we look at or how we present the information. So Taryn, I turn the floor over to you now for a brief overview of the Pesticide Committee regulatory structure.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. I think I do have a PowerPoint. Let me see if I can share it. Share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, perfect. So thank you again, Commissioner. I put together some slides just to sort of give a very high level, a high level overview as to sort of pesticides in general, the pesticide program, how pesticides are regulated in the state. I did focus on the registration process because that is where the pesticide board subcommittee comes into play. So I will just dive right into this. So when we're talking about pesticides within the state of Massachusetts, and honestly on the federal level, we're talking about a couple different sets of laws. So we've got FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. This is the federal law that regulates pesticides. This is regulated by EPA, and this is where the first step of a pesticide registration takes place. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail with that. I added the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act along with the Endangered Species Act in here as well, because as part of the registration process, EPA does have to take a look at laws that have been put in place through these two acts when they're looking at tolerances and effects and things of that nature when it comes to registering products. On the state level, we have two major laws. We've got a law and a regulation. So we've got the Mass Pesticide Control Act, which is MGL 132B, and then we have our supporting regulations, which are under 3.3 CMR, in which we provide most of our regulatory enforcement through.
Karen, can I interrupt you for a minute? This is
Sure.
Julie Richburg. It seems as though your slides are not advancing.
I'm sorry, they're not what?
They're not
Advancing.
advancing. We're just on the
Oh, they're
cover
not.
slide.
Oh, okay.
It's actually in the notes version of PowerPoint. It's not the
Okay.
slideshow version that we're seeing.
If you,
Your slides. All right, let's.
If on that menu you can hit hide presenter view, that might help as well.
Oh, there we go. Is that better?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. So to roll in the first and the very basic thing as far as what is a pesticide. So underneath our regulations, 3.3 CMR section 203, we have a definition of what a pesticide is. And this is actually the same definition that is underneath the federal rule as well. So it's any substance or mixture of substances that are intended to prevent, destroy, repel, or mitigate any pest, and any substance or mixture of substances intended for use as a plant regulator, defoliant, or desiccant. So sort of general terms, if you've got a product out there that's going to make any sort of claim to kill something, it most likely will need to be registered as a pesticide. So you have this general term of pesticide, and underneath there, you have the terms insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, rodenticides, and a few others, but they all fall underneath the definition of a pesticide and therefore have to be regulated as such. So when we talk about registration of pesticides, we really need to start on the federal level first, because that's where everything begins. So if a product is developed and the manufacturer wants to put it out into the world, essentially the first thing it needs to do is go through EPA. There is an application process in which the manufacturer provides a whole bunch of information, which includes the identity and quantity of all the chemicals within the product. So this is the active ingredient and the inert ingredients. They provide data on potential risks to human health and the environment, including the potential for pesticide residues on food if it's applicable. They provide proof that the product manufacturing process is reliable. They include draft labeling as to what the label may look like going onto the product. That label may or may not change through the EPA's review process. And then they have to provide evidence that they meet all legal and financial obligations. So once an application is submitted to EPA, they start doing, essentially a deep dive into all of this information, and they start doing assessments. So they look at human health and they look at environmental risks. When they're looking at human health, they include sensitive groups like children and the immune suppressed individuals. And they're looking at toxicity studies. They take a look at aggregate risks, cumulative risks, occupational risks. And when they're looking at all this, they do add a safety factor of 100 times, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times per use, depending on sort of the use pattern of the product, the active ingredient, and application rates. And that all goes back to sort of what the Food Quality Protection Act might have in their rules and regs as well. When they look at environmental risks, they take into consideration wildlife and plant toxicity, environmental fate and exposure, ecological risks. They do look at endangered and threatened species, which is where the Endangered Species Act comes into play. And then they look at the potential for endocrine disruption effects as well. They then implement risks assessments. And so they review all the scientific data on the pesticide product, and they develop risk assessments that look at the potential effects. And this is on potential effects on human health and also the environment. Human health and environmental risk assessment process undergoes a peer reviewed by scientific experts. And then at the end of it all, there's opportunities for the public to comment on the registration actions. I will say this, throughout all of EPA's processes, there is typically multiple opportunities for the public to comment, whether it's the initial registration of it, whether it's re-registration, or whether it's through the registration review process. EPA will do the legwork, and then they put that forth out for a public comment. And then based on what public comment comes back, they may or may not go back into the review process or the registration process to look for additional information. Based on this whole review process, EPA, after they've looked at everything, they'll decide whether or not they want to register the product, what type of classification the product will be, whether it's going to be registered as general use or restricted use. And then they also approve the final label language. And this is really, the label language is really key, and I'm going to go into that shortly. I do want to talk a little bit about classification of products. So on the federal level, it can be registered as general use or registered as restricted use. If it's registered as restricted use, it will have language on the label that says that the product is restricted use. This comes into play when we get to the state level of registration. So EPA also conducts registration reviews on the active ingredients at least every 15 years. If new use patterns are requested, then EPA may conduct another risk assessment. On top of that, in some cases in the past, registration reviews have been bumped up. So it's been sooner than the sort of normal 15-year cycle. When we're taking a look at labels, so EPA has to approve a label before it goes on the product and goes out for sale. And there is some very specific things that need to be on the label that are required under FIFRA to be on there. This is just a list of some. So there's that restricted use statement, product name, the ingredient statement, which only includes the active ingredient and the percentage. It will tell you the percentage of inert ingredients, but that is protected information. So the inert ingredients are not listed on the product. There's signal words on the product, which refer to the toxicity. First aid information, EPA registration number, which essentially is like the social security number of the product, hazards and precautionary statements, hazards to humans and domestic animals, environmental hazards, worker protection if it's required, directions for use, storage, and disposal. And this is one of the more most known statements, at least within the industry, is the statement that says it is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. And so this is also true on the state level. So if somebody misuses a pesticide, if they don't follow label directions, technically it's a federal violation, but also in Massachusetts, we have regulations that essentially say the same thing. So when it comes to labeling, it's important to note that the label reflects the data and potential risks that were presented during the registration process. The label mitigates potential risks associated with the use of the product. So when we talk about pesticides, we don't say that a pesticide is safe because its intent is to kill a pest. But what we do say is that if using it according to label directions, it should pose the least amount of risk, or it will minimize the risk that potential product will pose. And so I provided just a couple paragraphs here as far as what some label language would look like. Things like apply when wind speed is less than 10 miles per hour, or drift may cause damage or death to non-target area vegetation. Do not apply when conditions favor target area. This product is highly toxic to bees, exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops if bees are visiting the treatment area. When you see these do not phrases, that's enforceable label language. That's what we call enforceable label language. So if somebody was to apply a pesticide and we were to find that it drifted either onto a neighbor's property or onto a non-target, essentially they would have violated the label. Labels also have some informative language and suggestions that help the applicator follow the label directions and reduce risk. And we're actually seeing more and more of this on labels. So this first statement here where it says the product may impact surface water quality due to runoff. This is especially true for poor draining soils and soils with shallow groundwater. The product is classified as having high potential for reaching surface water. And then there's the suggestion of a level, well-maintained vegetation buffer strip between areas to which this product is applied in surface water features, will reduce the potential loading of, and then insert whatever active ingredient I pulled this label from runoff, water, and sediment. So this isn't actually providing any directions on how to apply the product, but is providing some really good information for whoever's going to use this product as to whether or not they should use this product given the area that they're making the application to, and or if they're going to use it, some suggested actions on what they could do to reduce any risk that it might pose. Again, that last little piece, which is runoff of this product, will be reduced by avoiding applications when rainfall is forecasted. So again, this is label language that EPA manufacturer will put on there, or EPA will mandate that a manufacturer puts on there to mitigate and reduce the risk that the product may pose. So once we get through the federal process, then we get to the state process. So if we have a product that's been registered by EPA and the product would like to be, the manufacturer would like to sell the product in Massachusetts for use, it needs to be registered in Massachusetts. And the entity that does the registration is the Pesticide Board Subcommittee. And so this subcommittee is established by the Mass Pesticide Control Act. It consists of 5 members. So it's got a member from the commissioner from the Mass Department of Ag Resources or a designee, Mass Department of Conservation Recreation, Mass Department of Public Health, the Director of Division of Food and Drug, who also serves as the chair, and then representative from commercial applicators. And that's the subcommittee that essentially reviews a product if it wants to come into the state to be used for use. They'll make the decision as to whether or not allow that to happen. So the way that the process happens on the state level is it can be broken up into 2 separate processes. So we've got a routine registration, which is a new product that's coming into the state, but it has an active ingredient that is already present in products in Massachusetts. And then the second process would be a new active ingredient. So this would be a new product containing a new active ingredient that's never been registered in the state. And then the subcommittee has to take a look at that as well. So when we're talking about routine registration, all applications are sent to the Mass Department of Ag. We are charged with doing the administrative back end of product registration. So a registration review is conducted. They have to send in fees, labels, forms, etc. And then we conduct a technical review. And we have staff that reviews the label. They determine if the active ingredient is new in Massachusetts. They determine if the active ingredient is on the groundwater protection list. And if so, they have to review the use patterns to assess if a reclassification is needed. That is something that's been put into place through our regulations. We determine if a product needs reclassification due to previous decisions made by the subcommittee. So the subcommittee over the years has made certain policies that if, so for example, if a product has more than 20% 2,4-D, it would automatically be state restricted. The more recent policy that was recently voted on was relative to neonicotinoids, and certain use patterns of neonicotinoids would then automatically be state restricted. So when we're reviewing an application, we need to make sure and determine whether or not that particular product would fall into any of the current policies that the subcommittee is using. We also look out for new use patterns for the active ingredients and assess whether there's going to be additional review. When we talk about new active ingredient registrations, this is a lengthier process. So aside from the application that the manufacturer will submit to us, we also obtain and review EPA's registration documents, which include the human health and ecological risk assessments. We screen for use patterns that are relevant in the state. We consider the risks that are relevant to Mass and evaluate if any additional restrictions may be needed to be put onto this product. And again, sort of pointing to that groundwater protection, we assess the leaching and toxicological properties. 33 CMR section 12 has very specific criteria as to what could be considered a potential groundwater pollutant. And if that particular active ingredient meets that criteria, the pesticide product will be reclassified and become restricted. All of this information is then provided to the subcommittee to review and make a decision as to whether or not to register the product. So when we talk about reclassification, so if a product is registered by EPA as general use, then the state has the ability to put a restriction on it and make it restricted use. And this is, as I had kind of referred to before, when we're, in some instances, there are certain policies that the subcommittee has developed over the years, which would automatically make something restricted use. So it's general use on the federal level, and it could be general use in another state, but for one reason or another, the state of Massachusetts has decided to make it restricted use. And what this does is when you make something restricted use, it essentially now requires a different type of license in order for it to be used. If something is registered as federally restricted, it will automatically stay restricted within the state. We cannot lift a restriction that's made by the feds. I also just quickly wanted to touch on sort of really quickly how pesticides are regulated in Massachusetts as well. So we have the product registration process, but then we have the product use. And so when we're talking about using a pesticide, we do have a definition of use within our regulations, which includes application, storage, disposal, transporting, mixing, and loading. There are licensing requirements when using a pesticide. A license is required if you're using it commercially or if you're using it on somebody else's property. And essentially there's two tiers of licenses. It breaks down to a commercial applicator's license, or what a lot of folks call the core license, which is your basic type of license. You can use a general use pesticide with this license. You can use a restricted use pesticide with this license, but you have to be underneath the direct supervision of somebody with the second tier license, which is that commercial or that private certification license. In the certification scenario, you have to have had your core license for 2 years before you can qualify to take your certification exam. And then just a snippet of what's in our regulations. We have specific requirements about pre-notification, signposting, groundwater protection, rights of way restrictions, consumer information that has to be provided, record keeping, information that's left after an application is done. Our two general regulations that we use a lot is operating in a careful manner and using appropriate methods. If there's complaints and investigations, we're able to use the more generally worded regulations if we feel that an application was not done in a careful manner. And then what we have on staff is when we talk about product registration, we have 2 chemists on staff and 1 registration specialist. Within licensing, we have a program coordinator and 2 licensing specialists. And then we do have an enforcement crew where we have 1 chief who's also a working chief and 4 inspectors as well. And then very, very, very high level, very general, I did just want to note, so when I had earlier, I had said that EPA does registration reviews every 15 years. They had, EPA just completed most of their glyphosate review back in January of 2020. They came out with an interim decision. That interim decision stated that they continued to find that there are no risks of concern to human health when glyphosate is used in accordance with the label. They found that glyphosate is unlikely to be a human carcinogen, and that also they did find some ecological risks to terrestrial and aquatic plants and birds, and some low toxicity to honeybees. Part of their interim decision was to make some label changes to help mitigate those risks. And that's what you'll see a lot of times with the registration reviews. After a registration review, EPA can make the determination to pull a product, to phase it out, or to require additional labeling on the product to mitigate any risks. And that is it.
Okay,
If
thank
anyone has any
you.
questions.
Any questions or from the commission? Okay, well, thank you very much for that overview. Appreciate, Commissioner LeBeau. You're on mute.
Yep, thank you, Commissioner. We tried to provide a brief overview of the pesticide program to you all. Granted, it's rather dense. Taryn alluded in some of the slides to the EPA registration review process. I just want to put it out there. We didn't want to make the presentation longer. If there's interest from the commission for a more detailed study of that registration review process, we'd be happy to provide it. So I just want to put it out there for the group. Not quite sure how far down this path, this particular path, they want to go.
Thank you, Commissioner. And one of the things I think that may help us answer that question is probably some of the things we're going to hear about next, which is, gathering the information that we need to do this review. And, you raise an interesting question about how this recent EPA work fits into that. But I know I believe we're looking to cast a broad net to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information as we're reviewing the health and ecological impacts of this. And so it may be that this comes up either as we're designing the studies, looking at the information we've gathered, or generating questions from that. So I appreciate your comment. So with that, this may be a good point, and to talk about how do we gather the information the commission needs to do its work. And I know Dr. Mark Smith from our Office of Research and Standards has been talking to colleagues about how we might tackle this assignment and provide the commission members with the information that we need. I might open the floor up to you, Mark, and to provide some information on how we start gathering this information.
Sure, absolutely. Am I coming through loud and clear to everyone? Okay,
Yes,
great.
I'm seeing nodding heads.
Nodding heads, that's good. Yeah, so to assist the commission in conducting the scientific review of the information that Marty reviewed earlier about impacts of glyphosate, we have developed a draft scope of work with the intent of potentially hiring an outside consultant to assist with gathering the data and information that the commission would need to have at hand for conducting that review. and to also provide some review of that information as well. So we are aware of the EPA 2020 review of glyphosate. And we're also aware that for these reviews, there's typically a cutoff point. And I don't specifically know where EPA drew the line, but I'm guessing it was probably sometime in the time period of 2019 in terms of the documents and information that was reviewed in that consideration. We're aware, based on a quick literature search, that there have been hundreds of additional publications in peer-reviewed literature on glyphosate over the past year alone, and probably several hundred more in the year prior to that. So anyway, our draft scope of work sort of lays out what we think are the primary questions that we would like the consulting group to provide for us. And certainly we welcome the input from the commission if we're missing anything, or if we're focusing on some things that you might all think is perhaps less important. The process here is that, at least as I understand it, is that DAR would secure the contractor, and then DAR staff and MassDEP staff would provide oversight for the work of the contractor in implementing the scope that we've laid out here. The end of December timeframe would be challenging, to say the least, in terms of trying to pull this information together. Possibly, probably challenging in terms of actually identifying and hiring the contractor and getting the work underway. However, we do hope that we'd be able to make some significant progress with respect to those particular issues within this year. And we're looking forward to the extension to March, which is still an aggressive time frame, but we do think that with the appropriate resources available, that would be able to make some significant progress. So I don't have any overheads or PowerPoint, but we did provide a document which was part of the package that was submitted to the commission members that sort of outlines the draft thinking behind the scope that we're proposing. And I'll just go through some of the key bullets. First of all, we're looking to the consultant to really summarize current uses of glyphosate in Massachusetts, both commercial, public, and homeowner residential applications, to get some information about that, and the use of some of the key alternatives here in Massachusetts. And we'd want them to sort of look forward. I don't know if commission members are aware of this, but Bayer has recently announced that they will be phasing out residential uses, consumer uses of glyphosate starting in 2023. So that would have some impact both on the use of glyphosate in Massachusetts and nationally, and probably also the use of some of the alternatives. We then would like the consultant to work with us and the Massachusetts Heritage and Endangered Species Program to take a look at any information that's currently available on current impacts of glyphosate and alternatives on various endangered and threatened species and habitats. To have them identify and collect various regulatory assessments, key peer-reviewed journal publications, and other sources of information on these agents. So that's really gathering information. And then to take a stab at reviewing the key elements and the key data that they've identified in terms of getting a better handle on the potential impacts of glyphosate in Massachusetts. And then take a look, and we typically do that when we're developing regulations, at what other federal and state agencies are doing with respect to the compound that we're regulating as well, so we get a sense of what in particular neighboring states may be doing to address this. And then to attempt a comparison at a high level of the potential public health and environmental impacts of glyphosate versus the alternatives that have been identified. And then there'll be some consulting requirements for the consultant to work with us in developing a report that would summarize the information available and getting that all done within the stipulated time frame. So that's a high-level overview of the scope that we're proposing, and we also have identified some minimum qualifications and preferred qualifications with respect to whoever would be brought on board to do this work. So anyway, that's the high-level summary, and we certainly would welcome any input and comments from the commission. Again, given the tight time frame, we are looking to try to move this forward, into the contracting phases and get the scope out on the street, if you will, as soon as possible, to provide the maximum amount of time to gather and analyze the data.
Terrific. So the idea would be to get this contract underway, get somebody to help gather this data so that you and your colleagues, and including Fish and Wildlife and agriculture, can start figuring out the best ways to compile it for us. Terrific. I think Eve Schluter has a comment or a question.
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. I was wondering what the best way is to provide feedback on that. Are we discussing it today, or do we send some comments on the draft? I took a look at the draft and I have some comments on the scope that I'd like to provide. So I'm not sure what the best way to do that is. One thing that I think is important to note for the whole commission is, even though it's in the legislative directive, everybody should be aware that there is no significant habitat in Massachusetts that's been designated. That's something that was was put in the 1990 MISA statute, but we've never officially designated significant habitat. We have designated what we call priority habitat, which is within our MISA regulations, which is a more flexible alternative to significant habitat and allows for development within these areas that are identified for endangered species. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of that, even though that's in the legislative directive. I believe the intent was probably to look at the areas that we've mapped for, rare species within the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that clarification. And going back to your first comment, I might put Benjamin on the spot here a little bit, to make sure that we're staying on the right side of the open meeting law. If there are comments coming from a particular commissioner to edit the procurement document we're talking about, is it better that we do this all here together, or is there that kind of room under the open meeting law? I just want to make sure we're doing this correctly.
Let me give it a little bit of thought, but my sort of intuition is that if there is any sort of document that needs to be jointly edited, that the edits, that the document go out to all the commission members, everybody provide their edits, but not to the other commission members, but to a single staff member who could then either bring it back to the commission if the commission, I think, elects, to, wants to kind of review those edits together, or if the edits are, if in the commission's, opinion or the chair's opinion, they don't need to go back, they're not that significant, then maybe the procurement document could be put out. But I certainly don't. I think if I need to give it more thought. I mean, I suppose that also the staff member that sort of compiles it could send it out and say, here are all the edits that have been received, right? But whether a discussion then ensues, on email, I think that would be the challenge.
Right. I'm trying to accomplish two things. First of all, maintain transparency here under the letter and the spirit of the open meeting law. And secondly, also recognizing Mark's great urge to,
Yeah.
get the document on the street. Let me ask you this, Eve, are they a lot of comments? I know Ann Lowry, I think, has the capability of bringing the document up on the screen, and commission members could all look at this at the same time. And if it's a substantial rewrite, that might not be practical, and we might be needing to have a second meeting. But if it is, I wonder if we couldn't do that, and Ann could sort of edit it in real time.
I don't think they're a lot. It's just some more clarifications, or where I think maybe there could be some expansion, just to make it abundantly clear what we want this person to, or persons to do. So I'm happy to share my thoughts verbally
Okay.
right now when we're looking at that, if that's the direction you'd like to go.
Yeah, why don't we try that? And in the meantime, I did also want to note, I noted on the chat screen and then confirmed on the participant list. I see Rep. Gentile is here, who is the sponsor of this legislation. I wanted to, particularly welcome him here, and maybe as after we've gone through this, in the public comment period, certainly Representative and others, invite your questions and comments. But thank you again for joining us. So if Eve, if you're able to just go through and tell us where the sections are, we'll try to do this in real time so that the group can keep moving.
Thank you. That document is not the one that I reviewed that was sent out.
Yeah, I think that's not the one. I think the one is called Scientific Review of Potential Impacts of Glyphosate. And are you able to take this one down and put that one up?
I will try to find it. Hang on. Apologies.
I'm not sure that, the commission has the document. I can just briefly mention a few things. So,
Okay.
in absence of having it visual. The first is on the first bullet of summarizing the use of glyphosate and its key alternatives in Massachusetts. I think it would be useful to expand on what the commission would like to see in terms of the use of glyphosate. I think it would be important to understand the methodology that's used and why it's being used by different groups. For example, in our own agency, the reasons that we use it, for habitat management purposes and invasive species control, and how those how there might be policies already in place by the agencies that might be using glyphosate to achieve those goals. So I think that would be important to get a summary of that, because I think there's a lot of information out there on how people are using it appropriately and for what reasons. And then so this is down, if you scroll down to the bullets, the tasks. Yeah, so that would be that first bullet. In the second bullet,
And I'm sorry, the proposed change you would make is to say,
I guess I would expand on the where it says summarize the use of glyphosate. You could have something that would include methodologies and rationale or something to that effect. I didn't wordsmith it. I just made notes in terms of what I thought might be missing or could be expanded upon. So
kind of a how and why.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a great suggestion. Yep.
okay.
And then the second bullet here, I think, I've already mentioned there is no significant habitat. And
Mhm.
while I realize that's in the legislative directive, you could even just change that word to significant to their habitats, meaning
Mhm.
the habitats that, so it doesn't necessarily directly relate to either a statutory or regulatory definition. It's just the habitats for the rare species. So,
Mhm.
and I think it would be important to, in that process, outline how we review the use of these, how we review the use of glyphosate and how we work to minimize and avoid impacts to state listed species. So not just identifying the potential impacts, but how we actually are working to avoid and minimize impacts. Because there's a whole process for that through our regulatory review. And then just for my own clarification, I thought the next two bullets were fine. The bullet that starts with summarize legislation for these herbicides by federal agencies, and it says and key states. I guess just having a little clarity on what do we mean by key states? I mean, additional, is there specific states we would want to look at? How do we narrow that down, or is there some sort of way to clarify what we would want to see there?
Sure. We would typically look at what neighboring states,
Yeah,
for
that's what I
example,
thought.
are doing. So Northeast states. And then we would typically also look to see if there may be some other state that has recently changed or done something new from a regulatory or management perspective. So that would be a sort of a survey of what other states are doing. And I personally don't know enough about what the other states are all doing to identify a priori which those might be, but just to look to see.
Yeah. And then I guess similarly on the bullet that starts with consult with other state, local and national agencies, it says as well as stakeholder groups, maybe some clarity on what falls under the category of stakeholder groups, or who they should be potentially consulting with there. Was there a thought behind that? I see Julie has her hand up.
Yeah, Eve, thanks for some of these suggestions. I had taken some notes as well and had a couple of other comments to make on the task list. And that stakeholder groups was also a comment that I had, is do we want to, I priority decide what these are, or leave it up to the consultant, or nudge them in the right direction? And then I can run through some of my comments if now is a good time.
Sure. Julie, it is. And, in terms of the last comment by Eve that you also picked up on, would there be suggestions, the model of what you referred to, sort of giving a little bit of direction to the consultant, in terms of what types of groups? I think, generally, we're interested in knowing if people have data and information, and so we cast our nets broadly, but if it's helpful to be more descriptive, I think we're trying to just think about how we would do that.
Yeah, I think, there's like the North American Invasive Species Management Association, right? So groups like that I don't know if it makes sense to put it groups like that directly into, it's abbreviated NAISMA, NAISMA.
We could put it in as a for instance that,
As for an instance, yeah.
Yep.
E.g. or I.e. Yeah. NAISMA. Okay.
And so some of my other comments, similarly on the first bullet, where it says key herbicide alternatives, it's kind of getting to the same thing, right? Because this is such an aggressive time frame to really be specific as possible. Do we want to include a suggestion of what other herbicide alternatives we want investigated as well as glyphosate? So triclopyr, do we want to look at organics? Are there other pesticides that we want included in this review? Maybe it's by use type. We might want to get some, Taryn and others to weigh in. I know from the land management community that I'm involved in, it's mostly glyphosate and triclopyr, but there are other herbicides that are used as well. So just trying to be a little bit more specific as possible. And similarly, the bullet that begins compare potential public health. And it says based on key assessments. Do we want to flag what those key assessments are, or what components of those are key assessments should be? That just seems pretty broad to me. And I didn't know if there's a way, if we're going to expect the consultant to define those key assessments, if the commission wants to define those key assessments. So that was a question that I had as well.
Yeah, so let me take a stab at a couple of these things. There are 3 or 4 sort of chemical pesticide alternatives that I'm aware of. We could certainly identify those. I'm not really fully up on which are the preferable ones for use here in New England and Massachusetts. So that would be one of the things that I would like the consultant to do, is to really gather some information about what those are, from people who are actually out, doing this kind of work. So again, we could put in an EG here and list a few of them as examples, but I wouldn't necessarily want to preclude if the consultant identifies some other significant alternative, not having the scope to include that in the work. And then, with respect to the key studies, again, I think we can put in EG, the EPA assessment would certainly fall under the category as a key study. And there may be others, and I think we'll have to provide some guidance as the consultant gathers that information to identify which are the most important ones that we want them to delve into in more detail. Again, given the time frame, we're not going to really be able to do a comprehensive, primary literature assessment on everything here. So again, we can include an EG here, identifying the EPA assessment as one of those key studies.
I'm wondering, I guess this is, for you, Mark, as well as for the commission members, it seems like there are 3 areas where we want to make sure that we're adequately considering the universe. I heard alternatives, I heard stakeholders, and then I heard key assessments. And one of the things I'm wondering is if we could make this procurement such that the first deliverable, a soon deliverable, that this commission could react to in real time would have these consultants say, here's the here are the alternatives we're going to be looking at, And, you know, it would allow the commission members a chance to react to say, you know, not only to the ones that are listed, but the reasons why they're talking about the alternatives and whether or not we think that adequately covers the scope. You know, similarly, you know, they could also tell us, you know, who the stakeholders they have in mind to engage with would be. And then finally, the key assessments, you know, some preliminary sense of what they're looking at, recognizing that, you know, they're going to then get some additional feedback from this commission and then, you know, proceed with their work. But I'm wondering, like, if in a month, you know, we could get back together and get that first product from them. Are we able to structure a procurement like that? So it's a question, you know, both for the commission and for you who will be, you know, implementing the contract. Does something like that work for the commission members and give some more confidence that you're getting a real-time sense of what they're looking at rather than them getting too far down the road before we know these variables?
I think that is a great idea, Commissioner, to have kind of that it's set up in advance, that the consultant knows that they're going to be taking these tasks in a stepwise fashion to make sure that they're getting input from us along the way.
Okay. You might see, Eve, that would also, I think, address some of your comments. And again, you know, if you know, we're talking about a meeting in another month, you know, 6 weeks, you know, that's, you know, it should work in terms of, you know, this will be, you know, again, an opportunity for us to check in before things have gotten too far down the path. And, you know, we're either not looking at something we wanted to look at or have some clarification that we're seeking.
Yeah, I agree. I think that could work well.
But in the meantime, we'll add these. I think that's Ann who's been typing here, and thank you, Ann, for trying to capture the sense of the group. But I think, you know, this has been efficient to make sure that we are getting the commission members' input like this, and so we'll refine it in this sense. Are there other comments on this? And if we set it up in this way, you know, trying to get a sense of the, you know, commission members, if they're comfortable with us proceeding with this very important element now of the first check-in on these 3 areas.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think first I'd like to say, Mark, I think this is a great overview on how to conduct this assessment. I have maybe 3 comments that I think generally have been covered, but maybe I'll explicitly state them here. In terms of structuring it with preliminary deliverables, I think that's something I'd also advocate for. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to make it somewhat iterative, in that if there's an opportunity to share interim deliverables with stakeholders of the commission, have the consultant take that information back and include other elements, and deliberately or explicitly work that into the contract, where stakeholders that have been identified, once elements of this report are identified, they'd be given the opportunity to say at some checkpoint, you've missed this, or also include this, with some very finite kind of periods of check-in. So that might be one sort of suggestion. The other, and Mark, I don't know if this is explicitly included as a state stakeholder, but given that the Pesticide Board Subcommittee will be charged with using this document to make a somewhat regulatory decision, and this may be a question for Taryn and Commissioner LeBeau, but will they be given the opportunity to maybe provide some iterative feedback on the nature and structure of this document, to make sure it includes elements that they'd have to bring back to their agencies or constituents to ensure that they're making an informed decision. So I'd like to put that out there, with fully understanding I may be suggesting something that's precluded by the the nature of this commission and the public meeting law, but I'll throw it out there. And then the third is really on these alternatives. Mark, you've explicitly mentioned chemical alternatives. I know from serving on the subcommittee when the discussion on glyphosate has come up previously, oftentimes an alternative that's discussed is literally mowing right of ways and removing grass through or other vegetation through physical means, and then looking at glyphosate in terms of in comparison to risks of physical injury from removing from using it as a pesticide in comparison to alternative means. So I'm not sure if that's something that's explicitly included in this, but it might be something we want to at some point discuss.
Eve, you had your hand up?
Just to follow up on that, you know, you could, under that first bullet of summarizing the use of glyphosate, and then you have key herbicide alternatives, there could also be, you know, other alternatives that are considered, like you were just suggesting, in terms of mechanical means, something to that effect. If you're in your case, like for managing, you had mentioned rights of way, but you know, whether it's for other habitat management purposes or whatever it might be. So not just alternative herbicides, but alternative methods. Yeah, methods for controlling vegetation, be it goats or whatever else.
Okay, Commissioner LeBeau.
Thank you, Commissioner Suberg. I just wanted to respond to Mark's question relative to this draft document and you know, how MDR sees it. At the staff level, MDR was involved in the development. MDR staff with DEP staff worked together on the development of this document. So we find it meets the needs that we think are important for this exercise.
Okay. All right, so other comments? Not hearing any. Are we, and I'm, because we're new, this is the first time us all being together as a commission and learning our way. I assume it's probably safer for us to proceed with a vote to authorize staff to go ahead with this procurement, you know, as amended by the comments here. They may clean up the language a little bit to you know, make it look like more like a procurement document, but I think, you know, we would have the you know, certainly the concepts would all be in there, and we would move it, you know, we would move ahead with a procurement along these lines, you know, obviously the lawyers have to, and the procurement people have to, you know, make it fit the format, but the concepts all would be here as articulated and as amended by the various commission members. So I think, you know, just to be, you know, just to make sure that we're good with that, I would propose that we approve, you know, authorizing staff to go ahead with this procurement with this document as amended, with some ability to, you know, refine the language, but not lose the concepts, you know, make language changes consistent with the concepts developed here. And I might ask if you know, the commission members are in favor of it. So I'll do it by roll call, as I think Benjamin told us we needed to do it. So I'll start with Commissioner LeBeau.
Yes. I do.
Okay, Mark Nascarella.
Yes.
Okay, Eve Schluter.
Yes.
and Julie Richburg.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. I want to thank the commission members for working through that. Again, I think we've made some really important progress here. It allows us to move forward, and it allows us to proceed in a somewhat iterative fashion, which I think a number of you made really good points about today. So I think this has been a really important discussion, and hopefully sets us on a good path. And Mark Smith and team, thank you very much for pulling this together for us. So terrific. With that, I think then we're going to move on to the public comment section of want to make sure that we have opportunities for public comment. If you'd like to have public comment, if you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand. And Paul Locke, I'm going to rely on you to tell me, what I do next, as you see the hands raised in the virtual room that you're looking at right now.
Before we go to public comment, or as to kick it off, Representative Gentili has his hand raised.
Excellent.
And
it looks like he's unmuted himself. Terrific.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. I want to thank you and all the members of the commission for this first meeting. And I just have a couple of brief comments. We have, I find that government works best when all three branches are involved. And so, the commission was created by the legislature. The members are drawn from the executive branch and the community. And part of what you're looking at today, we're looking at key assessments, to look at key assessments. And I would submit to you that some key assessments have been made in the judicial branch of government. When I first filed legislation to restrict the use of glyphosate in the Commonwealth, the reason I did that was because I read and I observed that there were over $4 billion in damages awarded to thousands of, more than 1,000 cases of plaintiffs bringing suit against the manufacturer of glyphosate for personal injury and death caused by glyphosate. And as was noted earlier in the meeting today, the manufacturer has pulled back on the retail sale of glyphosate through its popular weed killer product. I would ask that one of the key assessments to look at are easily obtainable. The plaintiffs in this litigation all over the country had submitted requested findings of fact. Judges have made findings of fact, and I think that something's to be learned from what's happened in the judicial branch. I mean, that what happened there is what caused me to take action legislatively and ultimately created this commission. I'm a lawyer, I'm a trial lawyer, and I can recall driving down to Bayonne, New Jersey to examine the federal records there to find out what had happened in cases. And also my other comment is as regards to the time frame. This was originally put down as December 31st, as a chairman pointed out, as a commissioner pointed out. Senator Roush has an amendment that was allowed in the Senate to extend it to March 31st, and I would observe that the legislature, both the House and the Senate, regularly extend their own deadlines, their own self-imposed deadlines, in order to get the best result or a really good result where completing work earlier would not render such a good result. Witness the last, when we started the pandemic, we didn't come out with a budget, a 12-month budget right away. We went with a 1-month budget, and then a 1-month budget, and then a 3-month budget. We're finally ending up for the rest of the year. And the reason we did that was because we couldn't really deliver a good product because of the unknown, because we didn't have the facts that we needed. Just read in the Globe today about another commission that was put together and was supposed to have its report finished a couple of months ago. And, you know, they really haven't been moving along very well. I'm really impressed. I'm very impressed with today's hearing and the level of energy. And I want to thank you all for what you've done today. And I'm confident that we'll have a very good result. One last thing I'll say to you, you know, really my primary concern and what I really would like to see come out of this is focusing on the public health impact of glyphosate. You know, at the suggestion of one of the advocates, I had my own blood tested, and because glyphosate appears in so many of our processed foods on our grocery store shelves, and so I spent $100, got my blood tested for glyphosate, and I found that the level of glyphosate in my blood is 300% the amount that's allowed to be in potable water and drinking water in the European Union. So, you know, that says to me that, and also I understand that if one just eats organic foods, that, you know, organic foods don't have glyphosate in them, you know, that level would drop down quite a bit quickly. I haven't done that. I haven't switched over to organic food. But again, I want to thank you for your work today, and I look forward to the meetings, to the hearings to come. And I will do everything I can to see that extension to March 31st is made by the legislature. But I will tell you, if it isn't, there's no sanction. There's no sanction for doing a good job and taking the time that a good job requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and you know, thank you for all of that feedback. And you know, we are very appreciative of your joining us and supporting this effort. And you know, you did make a very important point on the key assessments, and that we are capturing all of the information, including that you outlined, and we will endeavor to do that. So we really appreciate your support for us today, and we will make sure that we are continuing to work constructively and thoughtfully and produce a product that's useful for the pesticide board, that's useful for the entire discussions on these issues. Paul, does anyone else have a comment that they would like to make?
If you have a comment, please electronically raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute. I have no further comments that I can see.
Okay. Well, we went about 90 minutes today, which given you know, it being our first meeting and the important things we had to talk about, I think was 90 minutes very well spent. I think you know, in terms of next steps, I think what's going to happen is the staff is going you know, to work on getting the procurement out as amended, and with all the suggestions that that were incorporated. Try to find a successful you know, contractor, and then I think it would make sense once we have them. I assume that's going to take a little while, but once we have those people on board, give, you know, and this, you know, would be laid out in the contract that, you know, give them a little time. You know, their first task in the shortest period of time is that we would be able to review the you know, the 3 areas we talked about: alternatives, stakeholders, key assessments, and you know, as a group again. And so, you know, and if ideally this would be, you know, 4 to 6 weeks from now, if at all possible. What I'd propose is that we're going to move ahead, and what I will do is, when we have a better sense of, we'll let, when we have a better sense of who the contractor is, we will publish that and let the commission members know. And then we'll try to set up our next meeting as soon as possible, once we have that first interim deliverable. And so we'll be staying in touch in that way. So I don't know if there are any remaining comments from any of the commission members that are, or questions or issues you'd like to raise.
If I could just weigh in and say thank you to you, Commissioner, and your staff, both at MDR and DEP, for doing all this work of the procurement, organizing this. I really appreciate it. And if we can just be kind of kept in the loop of when the procurement notice goes out, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good addendum. I didn't specifically mention we should let you know when it's out, let you know when it's awarded, and then from there, yes. Well,
I just had a quick question. I'm sorry if I missed it, but how is the selection process going to work on this? Is this commission going to be reviewing the potential applicants, or?
That's an important question. Mark, I mean, I think initially, maybe that should be the first check-in. Well, I just want to make sure we're on the right side of the procurement issue. I mean, if it could be, maybe we need to be back together as this group on the award that the group is taking. Mark, have you and the OGC had a chance to do any of that thinking?
We have not, and I guess, I think it depends somewhat on the total contract amount as to sort of the specific steps that we would need to follow. And in addition, whether or not there are any qualified consultants that are on the master service agreement at either MDR or here at DEP. So those would be the next, sort of the next steps.
So maybe we would, that's a really good point, Eve. Maybe what we would do is, rather than, given what we're talking about, we are trying to use the most efficient contracting vehicles we can, but maybe our next meeting would be to get a review of who the commission is likely to appoint to do this contracting work, if that's consistent with procurement process. So we'll let that, you will not only get notice when it goes out, then I think what I'm hearing from at least Eve, and I'm seeing a couple of other nodding heads, that we have a meeting to let you know who, before the award is made, how the award, who the candidates are and why we're making the award we're planning to make. Very good. We're trying to move quickly, but this is a really excellent point that, if there's make sure that the commission is comfortable with the contractor we're choosing. Okay, any other comments?
I'd just like to say thank you to all the commission members for some excellent input regarding the scope of work. That's all very helpful comments. Thanks.
Terrific. Okay, so we may be in touch. We can definitely plan on being in touch at some point in the next month, recognizing that, late December is always an iffy time, but when we've made progress on the contract, that will probably be our next commission meeting. All righty. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody very much for participating, and I echo Mark's comments. I think this was an extremely important discussion for us to have today as we begin this process. So thank you. Hearing no other concerns, I guess under the open meeting law, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second,
All in favor, raise your hand. I see, let the record note that I saw each of the commission members raise their hand. We didn't do an individual roll call vote, but they did all indicate that they approve this. And so we are adjourned, and we're looking forward to our next meeting in the very near future. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.